They say real betrayal is never planned. It starts with a hand on your back when you're too tired to stand on your own. It starts with tears and wine and words you shouldn't whisper in the dark. For 40 years, Linda was my best friend, my sister, in every way but blood. She held my secrets like they were hers, patched my mistakes like a mother, and stood by me when my husband left me for a woman half my age. She was the one who taught me how to live alone and not feel lonely. And when her time came, when the cancer finally won, I sat by her bed and promised her I'd watch over Jim. "He's not good at being alone," she said, her voice a ghost of itself. "He'll need you, Elaine. Just check in on him for me." So I did. After the funeral, when the flowers wilted in the church dumpster and everyone went home to their clean kitchens and unspoken relief, I stayed. I made him tea he didn't drink. I wiped the same spot on the counter because I didn't know where else to put my hands. And when he pulled me close that night, his grief still fresh and sour on his breath, I should have pushed him away. I should have said, "No, Jim, you're grieving, we can't." But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, someone was holding me like they needed me, like they remembered I was still here. What happened after that? Well, that's the part I'll take to my grave. Or at least, I thought I would until today. Until I realized some secrets are heavier when you carry them alone. Linda and I met when we were both 24 and newly married, two girls with big hair and bigger dreams. We shared everything: recipes torn from glossy magazines, secrets whispered over cheap boxed wine, the same cherry lipstick we'd trade back and forth like it was magic. I always said Linda was the brave one. She was the first to buy a house when the rest of us still rented cramped apartments with peeling linoleum floors. The first to have a baby, then another. The first to figure out how to hold a marriage together long after the shine wore off. I was the one who stumbled, the one who believed a man when he said, "I'd never leave you," and then watched him pack his bags for a secretary with better legs and fewer years. I remember standing in my empty kitchen, the scent of burned pot roast still hanging in the air, wondering how a woman like me, plain, dependable, careful, could be so easy to forget. Linda never made me feel like I had failed. She'd sit at my table, sip my weak coffee, and tell me over and over again that a man who leaves is a man who never deserved to stay. "You'll be fine, Elaine. Some women are made to be loved by men who don't know how to stay. But you're made to survive it." When her children grew up and scattered across the country like leaves in the wind, Linda and I fell into a routine. Wednesday nights, movie marathons with microwaved popcorn. Saturday mornings, we'd meet at the flea market to hunt for treasures we didn't need. She'd always drift toward old teacups with tiny cracks in their glaze, whispering, "They're more interesting this way, don't you think? Imperfect but beautiful." She never said it, but I think that's how she saw me too, all the cracks and chips that life had carved into me. She'd run her fingers over my scars and call them stories, not shame. Then came the diagnosis. Small at first, just a lump. The kind the doctors say not to worry about until they start to. And by the time they started to, it was too late. I remember the smell of her hospital room, antiseptic and old sweat and flowers she couldn't smell anymore. Her skin turned paper, thin, her eyes too big for her face, but her voice that stayed Linda, sharp as a tack, even when her body betrayed her. "Promise me, Elaine," she whispered one night, when the morphine drip couldn't keep her ghosts at bay. "Promise me you'll look out for Jim." I wanted to say, "Jim's strong, he'll be fine." But I knew better. Jim had always been sturdy in body, but soft in spirit. The kind of man who bought the same sandwich at the deli every day for 30 years, who called Linda 3 times when she was 5 minutes late coming home from work. He loved her big, but he didn't know how to be alone. So he nodded. "I promise." The funeral was the coldest day we'd had that March. The sky a flat sheet of iron pressing down on the mourners huddled beneath black umbrellas. I stood beside Jim, my gloved hand tucked into his elbow, the two of us leaning into each other like broken fence posts. He didn't cry, not the way I expected him to. Instead, he stared at her coffin like, if he blinked too long, she'd disappear all over again. I squeezed his arm, trying to remind him he was still here, that we both were. After everyone drifted away, the friends who hugged me too long and too tight, the children who thanked me for being there when they hadn't been Jim, and I sat alone in the front pew. The flowers wilted around us, their perfume thick and sickly sweet. He didn't say much, just stared at the wooden box that held his whole world. I thought about how many times he must have kissed her forehead, pressed his hand to her back in the dark, whispered things only lovers can carry to the grave. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, like it scraped him on the way out. "I don't know how to do this," he said. I put my hand over his, felt the tremble there. "You don't have to know how, you just do it, one day at a time." That first night after the funeral, I told myself I'd just make sure he ate something. I'd promised Linda, after all, just check in on him, keep him company. One meal, one cup of tea. When I knocked, he answered the door still wearing his black funeral suit. His tie was gone, but the top button of his shirt was still fastened tight, like he'd forgotten how to breathe without her telling him it was okay. "I brought you soup," I said, holding up the container like a shield. He stepped aside, and I felt the warmth of the house close around me, familiar but foreign. Like stepping into a photograph you've looked at for so long, you start to believe it's yours. The kitchen was a mess of sympathy, casseroles, and half-eaten pies. I pushed aside a tray of brownies to make space for the soup, my hands busy because my heart didn't know what to do with itself. He sat at the table, staring at the spot across from him where Linda used to sit, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, the morning paper spread out like a map of the life they'd built together. "Eat, Jim," I urged. Asterisk, please. He picked at the bread I'd brought, tearing it into pieces he didn't put in his mouth. When I sat down, he looked at me, really looked like he was seeing me for the first time. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. "Of course," I said, and I meant it. Because where else would I be? When the clock struck midnight, I told him I should go, that he needed sleep, that I did too. But when I stood to leave, he reached for my hand, fingers cold and rough and clumsy. His eyes glistened under the kitchen light, and for a heartbeat, I saw the man Linda fell in love with all those years ago. Not the widower drowning in casseroles and pity, but the boy who once promised her forever. "Stay a while?" he asked, voice cracking on the last word. I should have pulled my hand back. I should have said, "No, Jim, I can't." But the kitchen was so quiet, and the wind outside rattled the window like bones in a box, and my own house would feel so empty when I got there. So I stayed. Just a while, I told myself. Just long enough to make sure he didn't drown in the silence. We sat in the living room, the clock on the mantel ticking too loud. He told me stories I'd heard before about the first time he met Linda at the bowling alley, how he'd dropped the ball on his foot because he couldn't stop staring at her smile. About the time they'd fought so badly, he'd slept in his truck for 2 nights until she forgave him with a slice of pecan pie and a promise not to bring it up again. I laughed at the parts I was supposed to, even though my throat felt tight. When his voice broke, I reached for his hand again. This time, he didn't let go. The first tear slipped down his cheek, and before I knew what I was doing, I was wiping it away with my thumb the same way Linda used to, I'm sure. His eyes closed under my touch. His breath shuddered against my wrist. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's okay to be sad." When he opened his eyes again, they were so close, so full of grief and something else, something softer and more dangerous. He leaned in then, not a kiss, not yet. Just the weight of his forehead resting against mine, the warmth of his breath mingling with mine in the hush of that old room. In that moment, I felt it, the line, thin and fragile and so easy to cross. I pulled back first, my heart hammering like it hadn't in years. "I should go," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, his thumb brushing the back of my hand like a secret he wasn't ready to say out loud. "Thank you, Elaine," he whispered. Asterisk. For being here, for not letting me drown. I squeezed his hand once before I slipped out into the night, the cold air biting at my cheeks, my heart heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to name. When I got home, I washed the smell of his house off my hands, but I couldn't wash away the warmth of his touch. I lay awake all night, listening to the wind rattle the window, wondering how I'd ever look Linda in the eye again, if ghosts could see the things we do when we think no one's watching. They say the first slip is always the easiest to forgive. You tell yourself it was the grief talking, the storm outside, the empty house. But when it happens again, when the phone rings and you don't let it go to voicemail, when the knock at your door comes and you open it without hesitation, that's when you know the line isn't where you thought it was. It started with the pie. About a week after Linda's funeral, Jim showed up at my porch with a store-bought pecan pie in a plastic bakery box. He held it out like a peace offering, or a question he was too afraid to ask outright. "I couldn't eat it alone," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like a boy waiting to be scolded. I should have told him no. Should have pointed at the porch light flickering above us, the way Mrs. Monroe across the street peeked through her blinds every time a car pulled into my driveway. But I didn't. I stepped aside, let him in, and found 2 forks. We ate straight from the tin, perched at my kitchen table like teenagers hiding from their parents. Every bite tasted like old memories. Linda's laughter echoing down the hallway at holiday potlucks, her hand warm on my shoulder as she scolded Jim for stealing a slice before dinner. At first we talked about nothing. The weather, the new grocery store that was supposed to open on Main Street, whether the Johnson boy had finally fixed his broken fence. But it never stayed there for long. Jim's eyes kept drifting to my hands as I picked at the crust, his gaze lingering like he was memorizing something he was afraid to lose. "You still wear your wedding ring," he said suddenly, his voice softer than the scrape of my fork against the tin. I looked down at my hand, at the thin gold band I hadn't taken off since the day Robert walked away all those years ago. I wore it like armor, like a promise I didn't know how to break even after he did. "Habit?" I said, my thumb brushing the edge of it. Asterisk. It feels wrong to take it off now, like admitting I was always alone even when I wasn't. Jim nodded, his eyes dropping to his own hand bare now, where Linda's ring used to glint under the kitchen lights. He twisted his napkin into knots. "Sometimes I wake up," he said, "and I swear I hear her in the kitchen, making that awful coffee, humming to herself. Then I come down and it's just empty." I reached across the table, my fingers brushing his wrist. A small, stupid touch. But when he flipped his hand and laced his fingers through mine, the quiet between us hummed like a secret too big for my small kitchen walls. That night, he didn't stay long. Just enough for us to scrape the pie tin clean, rinse the forks in the sink, and stand too close in the hallway while he shrugged into his coat. When he kissed my cheek goodbye, his lips lingered a fraction too long. I felt it like a pulse under my skin long after the door closed behind him. I told myself it was still innocent. 2 lonely people doing what Linda would have wanted, watching out for each other. Nothing more. But secrets have teeth. They grow hungry when you feed them scraps. The next time, it was the light bulb in his porch lamp. "I can't reach it, Elaine. Could you come over for a minute?" His voice sounded sheepish over the phone, like he knew how flimsy the excuse was. I brought my step stool, the same wobbly old thing I used to use to reach the high shelves. Linda insisted I put in my pantry because every woman needs a reason to feel tall sometimes. The bulb took 5 minutes. The coffee afterward took 2 hours. We sat on his couch, 2 mugs cooling on the table in front of us, neither of us drinking. Instead, we talked about Linda's old recipes scribbled on index cards, about the way her handwriting always leaned too far to the left. About the time she and I tried to make jam and ended up with a pot of burnt sugar that took weeks to scrub off her stovetop. At some point, he laughed. Really laughed, the first time since the funeral. I watched the way his shoulders relaxed, the years lifting off him for just a moment. And in that moment, I let myself wonder what it would feel like to be the reason he didn't drown. When he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. When he pressed his lips to my knuckles, I didn't flinch. When his thumb traced slow circles over the thin skin there, I closed my eyes and let the warmth bloom. Mrs. Harris saw my car that night. Of course she did. The next morning, she stopped by with a bag of stale muffins and a smile too wide for her small, sharp face. "Saw your lights on late last night," she said, her voice sugar, sweet and cold all at once. Asterisk. So good of you to look after Jim. Poor thing so lost without Linda. I forced a smile, the muffins heavy in my hands. Asterisk. Just keeping him company. Her eyes flicked to the ring still on my finger, then back to mine. Asterisk. Of course, dear. That's what good friends do. I shut the door behind her and leaned against it, my chest tight with the taste of her unspoken words. Secrets don't stay hidden in this town, not for women like me, not when you're old enough to know better but foolish enough to do it anyway. A few nights later, he came to me. I heard his truck before I saw him, that low, familiar rumble on my gravel drive. I should have pretended to be asleep, left the porch light off, let him turn around and go home. But my hand was on the knob before my mind could catch up. He stood there in the dark, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His eyes looked tired. His shoulders slumped like the weight of Linda's ghost was pressing down on him, pressing him into my arms. "I can't be in that house tonight," he said. Asterisk. "Every room smells like her." I stepped aside. He didn't even have to ask. We sat on the couch, our knees brushing, the old lamp throwing shadows on the walls. He didn't say much, neither did I. When he rested his head on my shoulder, I felt the tremor in his breath, the way his hand curled into my hip like a question I was too afraid to answer. His lips found my neck before they found my mouth. A soft, searching touch. Not hunger yet, but the seed of it, rooting deep in the place I'd kept buried for years. I should have pushed him away, but my hand slid into his hair instead, my breath catching when his tongue traced the line of my jaw. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine for something he was terrified to name. "This is wrong," he whispered. I nodded, my fingers still tangled in his hair. Asterisk. "I know." And then he kissed me anyway. It was soft at first, a slow, careful pressing of lips, like we were both afraid the world might catch us mid-breath. But secrets, once they taste daylight, don't settle for a whisper. His hands slipped under the hem of my sweater, fingers warm against the soft skin at my waist. My body, traitorous thing that it is, arched into him like it remembered what it felt like to be wanted. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the hush of my old house. "Tell me to go," he murmured. I opened my mouth, the words right there. "Go, Jim, we can't." But they died on my tongue. Instead, I said, asterisk, "Stay." Outside, the rain kept falling. And inside, we crossed a line I'd sworn I'd never touch. They say when you cross a line, you don't always feel it under your feet. Sometimes it's soft, warm, almost sweet, like drifting off to sleep with someone's breath in your hair. You don't notice you're falling until you wake up tangled in a secret that has teeth. The night Jim stayed over really stayed. The house felt different when he left. The air still smelled like him. His aftershave, the faint scent of rain soaked into his flannel. The old quilt on my bed felt heavier, the sheets still warm from his weight beside me. For a few days, I told myself it was done. A one-time slip. A moment of weakness for two people who knew better. But secrets, once fed, don't settle down like good dogs. They growl at the door. They scratch at the windows. They want out. Jim started texting. At first, it was harmless if you squint at it sideways. "Did you sleep okay? Thinking about you. Can I stop by?" But the words shifted quickly, turned softer around the edges. Sometimes he'd slip in a line that made my skin flush under my nightgown, made me drop the phone in my lap like it had bitten me. "I miss how you taste. Wish I was there now." I never answered those messages right away. Sometimes I'd delete them as soon as they buzzed my phone, as if erasing the words could erase what we'd done. But every time, my thumb hovered just a second too long, tracing each letter like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. One afternoon, I went out to water the roses by my porch, the ones Linda helped me plant years ago, the same ones that never bloomed quite right since she passed. Miss Harris was crouched by her fence, her wide-brimmed hat drooping over her eyes like a tired sunflower. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me from under that hat, her hands buried deep in the damp dirt. Finally, she called out, her voice so sweet I could feel the rot in it. "How's Jim holding up, Elaine? Poor thing must be so lonely now." I felt the watering can tremble in my hands. "He's managing," I said, forcing my lips into something like a smile. She straightened, brushing the dirt from her gloves, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "So good of you to keep him company. Not everyone would be so selfless." There it was, the twist in her tone, the flick of her eyes toward my front door. I wanted to throw the roses in her face. Instead, I went inside, locked the door behind me, and pressed my back to the wood like it could hold in all the truths fighting to get out. That night, Jim came by again. No excuses this time, no pie, no light bulb, no leaky faucet to fix. Just him, standing on my porch with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes dark with a hunger I recognized because I felt it too. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice rough at the edges. I stepped aside anyway. "Then don't stay long." The lie tasted sweet in my mouth. We didn't make it to the bedroom that time. The hallway was enough, the press of his back against the wall, my hands tugging at the buttons of his shirt like they'd betray me if they didn't. His mouth was on mine, hungry and clumsy, tasting of guilt and something wilder that made my knees weak. When it was over, we stayed pressed together, our breathing the only sound in the hush of my old house. I could feel the guilt coiled in my gut, but I didn't let go. Neither did he. The next morning, I found his jacket draped over the back of my kitchen chair, a small, stupid thing that made my stomach twist. I pressed my face into the worn fabric, breathed him in until the tears came. Before I could talk myself out of it, I balled up the jacket and shoved it into a paper bag, ready to drop it at his front door like it was evidence I didn't want in my house. But when I stepped onto my porch, Mrs. Harris was there again this time with her little dog yipping at my garden gate. Her eyes flicked to the bag in my hands. "Going somewhere?" "Just returning something," I said, my voice too bright, too thin. She hummed that low, knowing sound old women make when they're filing your secrets away for later. "So nice of you to look after him." Linda would be, well, she'd be proud, I suppose. I hated how her words stuck to me, like the stench of cheap perfume that never quite washes off. Inside, I paced my kitchen like a caged animal. The phone buzzed on the counter. "Jim, again. Can I see you tonight?" My thumb hovered over the reply. I could hear Linda's voice in my head, the way she'd laugh when she caught me staring too long at Jim's broad shoulders all those summers we cooked out by the lake. "You've got to look, Elaine. Be careful where you aim it." I aimed it all wrong. That night, I didn't answer his text. I told myself it was over, that I'd do the right thing, close the door, shut the window, let the hunger starve itself out. But the next morning, the loneliness came back bigger, sharper, hungrier than before. It sat with me at the breakfast table, in the empty space beside my coffee cup. It pressed its mouth to my neck when I lay awake in my too-big bed. And when he knocked again, I opened the door. Again, the messages turned bolder. So did we. I found myself wiping lipstick from my mouth before I opened the blinds each morning, checking the driveway twice, 3 times, to make sure no one saw him slip away at dawn. I started leaving my porch light off, the hallway lamp on low, the rituals you learn when your shame is bigger than your resolve. One afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was bagging groceries at the corner store. I pulled it out, thumbprint smudged across the screen, and there it was. A message from Jim. "I can still taste you." My cheeks went hot, too hot, as I realized the cashier, a girl barely old enough to rent a car, was staring at my face, then at the phone, then back at my wedding ring. She didn't say anything. But she didn't need to. I deleted the message. But it didn't matter. Secrets don't vanish just because you hit trash. I told myself I'd stop. I told myself I owed Linda better. I owed myself better. But every time Jim touched me, the hollow places inside me went quiet. Every time he whispered my name, I stopped hearing the judgment in the neighbors' voices, the cold edge in David's rare phone calls asking how Aunt Linda's place was holding up. But you can't hid forever. It was a Tuesday when it all cracked open. The mail came late that day, the usual junk stuffed in with a plain white envelope, no return address. I almost tossed it in the trash, but something made me slit it open. Inside was a photo. Blurry, grainy, but clear enough. Jim's truck parked behind my garage, the porch light off, the kitchen window glowing soft with the shape of 2 people pressed too close together. On the back, a single word written in neat, tight cursive. Whore. My knees buckled. I sat on the floor, that word burning my palm like an iron brand. The phone rang, Jim's name lighting up the screen. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Because suddenly, the thing we'd built in the hush of my old house didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like a hammer hanging over my head, and it was only a matter of time before it fell. Outside, Mrs. Harris watered her geraniums, her hat dipping toward the ground, her eyes flicking up to my window. Secret don't stay buried. They bloom rotten roots pushing up through every crack you thought you'd sealed shut. And somewhere in my chest, a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, I should have pushed him away. They say secrets make you sick, but they never tell you it's the waiting that kills you. The hours between the knock on your door and the slam when it closes. The way your stomach knots every time the phone rings, wondering if it's someone who knows. Someone who wants to drag what you've done out into the light. After that envelope came the picture. The words scrawled on the back like a wound I couldn't wash off. I didn't answer Jim's calls. I didn't text him back. I didn't open the door when I saw his truck crawl up my drive and idle at the curb like a stray dog begging to come inside. But the longer I hid, the louder the whispers got. Mrs. Harris, of course, was the first to make it her business. I'd catch her standing at the end of her driveway, watering the same patch of dry earth for 10 minutes straight, her eyes fixed on my front door. Once, she called out as I took out the trash. "Quiet night last night?" She said it, with that pinched little smile of hers, the kind that slices deeper than a shout ever could. I didn't answer. I just dropped the bag in the bin, my hands shaking inside my gardening gloves. It wasn't just her. I felt it everywhere, the way the cashier at the grocery store looked through me instead of at me, the way my phone stayed silent, except for Jim's name lighting it up over and over again. But I didn't have the strength to face him. Not yet. It was David's call that pushed it all over the edge. My son never calls without a reason. He's a good man, his father's sense of responsibility, my mother's disapproval braided into his DNA. He lives 2 states away now, but that doesn't stop him from believing he can still police the corners of my life. The phone buzzed late on a Thursday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the photo still tucked under my coffee cup, like a talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. "Hey, Mum." I knew from his voice it wasn't a social call. He cleared his throat. "You okay?" I almost laughed. The word felt so stupid on his tongue. "Okay?" I wanted to say, "No, David, I'm not okay. I'm 65. I'm sleeping with my dead best friend's husband, and someone just called me a whore in my own mailbox." Instead, I said, "Of course. Why?" The silence stretched. I heard papers rustling in the background, the distant echo of his wife's voice, the life he'd built so far from mine. "Did you know Mrs. Harris called me?" There it was, the hammer dropping. I closed my eyes. "What did she say?" "She said you've had Jim over. Late. Often. She said people are talking, Mom. They think you two are." He choked on the word, like just saying it out loud was too much. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself in the sting of splinters I hadn't sanded smooth in years. "David, it's none of her business." "It's mine," he snapped. "God, Mom, do you have any idea what this looks like? Linda was like family. Her kids still come over for Christmas, for God's sake, and you're—" He cut himself off, but I could feel the word anyway. "Whore," just like the back of the photo. I bit down on the sob crawling up my throat. "It's complicated, David." He made a sound halfway between a laugh and a scoff. Asterisk. "No, it's not. You're lonely. He's lonely. I get it. But this? It's not right. You need to stop. You need to tell him to stay away." I wanted to scream at him. "You don't know what it's like to fall asleep beside someone's ghost for 20 years, to miss the weight of a body next to yours so much you ache in your bones." But all I said was, "I'll think about it." When he hung up, the house felt smaller than ever. The walls leaned in close, the air thick with the smell of old memories and fresh shame. Jim came that night. He didn't text first, didn't knock, even just opened the door with the spare key Linda gave me years ago when we were still young enough to believe there'd always be a reason to visit. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the photo, when I heard his boots on the tile. "Elaine." His voice was soft, but there was a hardness under it I'd never heard before. I didn't look up. Just traced the edge of the envelope with my thumb. "Who took it?" I asked. He sat down across from me. His hands were shaking. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. Asterisk. Probably Harris. Or that nosy woman across from her. Doesn't matter. They all know now. I finally looked at him. He looked old, tired, the lines around his mouth carved deeper than the last time he sat in this chair. "David called," I said. He flinched like I'd slapped him. "He knows?" I nodded. Asterisk. They all do. Silence. The kind that hums in your blood, makes your teeth ache with the truth you don't want to say. Do you want me to stop coming? His voice was small then, like a boy lost in a department store, waiting for someone to find him. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I didn't know who I was anymore with him here, with him gone. Instead, I stood up, pushed the chair back, walked to the sink, ran the water so cold it made my fingers burn. He stayed where he was, his eyes on my back like a weight pressing between my shoulders. "Say it," he whispered. I turned, the water dripping from my fingertips. "What?" "Say you don't want me. Say you never did. Say this was just pity or loneliness or guilt." I looked at him, really looked the slope of his shoulders under that flannel, the way his hands trembled just like mine. And I hated him, and I needed him, and I didn't know how to be alone anymore. "I can't," I said. My voice cracked on the words. Asterisk. I can't lie like that. He crossed the room in 2 steps, his hands on my shoulders, his breath warm against my forehead. "Then I'm not leaving," he said. That night, he stayed. And when he touched me, it felt like drowning in a warm lake you know will swallow you whole. When he whispered my name, I let myself pretend it was someone else's voice, or that Linda was standing in the doorway, shaking her head, forgiving me because she always did. But when he fell asleep beside me, his arm heavy around my waist, my eyes stayed open until dawn, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks that had never seemed so wide. They say secrets make you sick, but it's not the secret that rots you from the inside out, it's knowing the whole world already knows, and you don't have the strength to stop wanting what you're not supposed to have. In the hush of the morning, I heard my phone buzz on the nightstand. A single text from David. "We need to talk. I'm coming down next weekend." And outside, I swear I could see Mrs. Harris at her window, watering those damn geraniums that never seem to die. Secrets don't die, either. They say confession is good for the soul, but they never say whose soul it saves, or whose it breaks wide open. I knew David would come the second he said he would. He's his father's son that way, a man who keeps his word, even when that word is a blade. He didn't give me a day to get my story straight, didn't give me a chance to rehearse what I'd say when he stood in my kitchen, his eyes flicking from my face to the chair Jim always left pulled out. It was a Friday morning when he showed up. I was still in my robe, the kettle just starting to hiss on the stove. I heard his car door slam, and I swear I felt the thud of it in my chest. I didn't open the door. He did. He still had a key, though he hadn't used it in years. He didn't hug me, didn't kiss my cheek like he used to when he was a boy with scabbed knees and a soft spot for his mother. He just stood there in the doorway, the morning sun behind him, turning his face into something too sharp to love. Where is he? No preamble. No hello. I swallowed the lie that rose like bile. He's not here. His eyes narrowed. He looked older than he should, lines around his mouth that mirrored my own. But he was, wasn't he? I said nothing. The kettle shrieked on the stove. I turned, flipped the burner off, just for something to do with my hands. Mom. Just my name, no softness. Just the weight of his disappointment pressing into my ribs. "You don't get to do this," he said, asterisk. "Not to her, not to me, not to her kids." I turned then, my robe pulled tight around me like armor that didn't fit anymore. "You think I don't know that?" He scoffed, pacing the length of my kitchen like he used to when he was 16 and wanted me to let him stay out past curfew. "What is this, Mom? Some midlife thing? You get to play the grieving widow again, except now it's with your best friend's husband?" His words were arrows, each one finding its mark. I could feel them lodging between my ribs, the barbs catching on old promises I'd made to Linda, to myself. "You don't know what it's like," I started, but he cut me off. Asterisk number I don't. And thank God I don't. I didn't bury my best friend and then crawl into her husband's bed. I flinched. He saw it. He wanted me to see that he saw it. "Is it serious?" he asked, his voice dropping to something like pity, which was worse than the anger. "Do you love him?" Did I? Love never felt like the right word for what Jim and I had stitched together out of grief and old guilt. It wasn't love. It was hunger, loneliness. The echo of a woman who'd been gone too long to tell me not to. I shook my head. Asterisk. I don't know. David ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture his father used to make when the bills piled up too high. He leaned back against the fridge, staring at the magnet with Linda's handwriting still stuck there, a recipe she'd given me for lemon cake. "You promised her," he said quietly. "You said you'd look after him. You didn't say you'd—" His words trailed off, the rest too dirty to say out loud. A car door slammed outside Jim's truck. I knew the sound of it better than my own heartbeat now. David's eyes snapped to mine, dark with disbelief. "He's here?" Before I could answer, Jim walked in like he always did, with that old key Linda left him, the one I never asked him to give back. He stopped dead when he saw David. His face went pale, his hand still on the doorknob. "David." But David didn't let him finish. "How long?" His voice was so low, I almost didn't hear him. Jim cleared his throat. He looked older, too, under the harsh kitchen light, like the scandal was aging him by the hour. "Since after the funeral?" The truth, laid bare. "No dressing." David let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that doesn't hold any humor. He looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. "You disgust me," he said, and it wasn't just at Jim, it was at both of us. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him back to me, the way I used to when he was a boy with fevers and nightmares. But his eyes were glass, his shoulders stiff. "You think people don't talk?" he hissed. Asterisk. "Harris, the whole block, everyone's got a front row seat to this circus. Do you know what they're saying about you, Mom?" I did. I'd read it in one word on the back of a photograph. Jim stepped forward then, like he could stand between David's anger and my shame. "It's not her fault." But David rounded on him, fists clenched. "Asterisk. Don't you dare stand there and act noble. You're my godfather. You watched me grow up. And now you're—" "What? Sleeping with her like my mother never existed?" The word sleeping made my stomach lurch. Because it was true, but it wasn't enough to cover the softness that came after. The way Jim's fingers trembled on my spine in the dark, the way his breath in my hair made the ghost of Linda's perfume fade. David shook his head. He looked so tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. Asterisk. "You need to stop, both of you, or you'll lose everything." The silence that followed felt like someone had sucked the air from the room. I could hear the tick of the clock over the stove, the hum of the refrigerator, the slow, steady beat of my heart pounding in my throat. "What do you want me to do, David?" I asked. My voice was so quiet, but it still echoed. He stared at me. "My son, my boy, my judge. Choose," he said. "Asterisk him or your family. You can't have both." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because how do you choose between what you need and who you're supposed to be? Jim's hand slipped into mine, rough and warm and so familiar now. I hated myself for loving it. David saw it. His eyes hardened. "I'll come by for the rest of Dad's things next week," he said. Asterisk. "You can keep whatever you want. It's clear you've already thrown the rest away." And then he was gone, the screen door banging shut behind him like a final word. Jim pulled me into him, his arms around my shoulders, his breath at my temple. "We'll get through this," he whispered. But I didn't believe him. Because secrets have teeth, and ours were about to tear the rest of my life wide open. They say every secret has a price. They don't tell you what you'll pay until you're already counting the coins you don't have left. For weeks after David slammed that door, the house felt different. Quieter, but not in the comforting way quiet used to feel when Linda was still alive, when we'd sit at her kitchen table, trading gossip we'd never repeat. This quiet was heavy. Rotten. It settled into the corners of my bedroom, the creak of the floorboards when Jim got up to leave before dawn. Even his warmth beside me couldn't hush it. David didn't call. Not once. I left voicemails, small, useless things. "Did you eat? Did the kids like the package I sent? I saw a nice coat for Lily, I'll send it up." I didn't say, "I'm sorry," because I knew sorry wouldn't land right. Sorry didn't make a difference when you were the woman who betrayed the only friend you ever had worth keeping. Sometimes, when the house got too still, I'd find myself in the hallway, staring at the crooked picture of Linda and me at her wedding. We were both 24. Her veil was slipping, lipstick smudged, her arm hooked through mine like she never planned to let go. When I look at that picture now, I feel her there, not forgiving, not accusing, just watching. And that's worse than any punishment Mrs. Harris could gossip about over her fence. Jim started staying away more. Not because he wanted to, but because I asked him to. The first night I told him, "Don't come by tonight," he flinched, like I'd slapped him with the back of my hand. He tried to laugh it off, pressing a kiss to my forehead like it was enough. "You're just tired," he said. Asterisk. It's too much all at once. Let it settle. But it didn't settle. It curdled. He called instead. Little calls that stretched out like stale taffy, both of us searching for things to say that didn't sound like confessions. "You okay?" "Yes." "You?" "I miss you." Silence. One night he knocked anyway. He stood there on my porch, his eyes searching mine for the version of me that used to be too weak to close the door. But she was gone. Or maybe she was just hiding. He asked, "Do you want me to leave?" And for the first time, I said, "Yes." After that, I heard his truck less and less. He still sent flowers, sometimes lilies, the kind Linda hated because the pollen stained everything it touched. I'd toss them in the trash before they could bloom, but the smell always lingered in the kitchen for days. I wish I could say I missed him. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Maybe what I missed was the hush, the brief, warm hush of being touched like I was still a woman, not just someone's sad mother with a scandal rotting on her front porch. Mrs. Harris never said anything else. She didn't have to. Sometimes she'd wave when I stepped out to fetch the mail, a small, smug wave that said she knew she'd won. Her geraniums bloomed brighter than ever that summer. I almost admired them, the way they thrived on dirt and rumor. David sent a card for my birthday. It came in the mail, no return address, just his name scribbled inside, along with "Hope you're well." 4 words. That's all my son could spare after everything we'd traded between these walls. I don't blame him. Not really. I was the one who crossed the line, the one who never pushed Jim away, the one who forgot my promise when I should have held it tighter than my own skin. Some nights, I still feel Jim's hand on my hip, the way his thumb traced circles there when he thought I was asleep. Some nights, I let myself want it back. But when the morning comes, and the house creaks under its own weight, I know the wanting will never be worth the cost. Linda's voice stays with me. Not angry, not soft either. Just there, the echo of the friend who made me promise to look after her husband. The friend who trusted me because she thought I was stronger than this. Maybe I was, once. They say some secrets should be buried, but what they don't say is how deep you have to dig to keep them down. How much of yourself you shovel in with them, handful by handful, until there's nothing left but the memory of the hush. Jim moved away that winter. His daughter called me once to tell me he'd sold the house. "Too many memories," she said. I didn't ask where he went. Didn't ask if he'd found a bed that didn't smell like someone else's guilt. David didn't come for Christmas. The kids sent a card, a photo of them in matching sweaters, all teeth and bright eyes. I stuck it to the fridge with a magnet, right next to Linda's lemon cake recipe. I couldn't bring myself to take that down. Maybe I never will. When the wind rattles my bedroom window at night, I lie awake and think about that line, the one I should have held like a fence around my heart. The one I stepped over when his hand found mine after her funeral. They say I should have pushed him away. They're right. But what they never say is how warm it felt, just for a while. How sometimes the thing that ruins you is the same thing that makes you feel alive again. So I keep the hush inside me, tucked deep where no one can name it, no matter how many flowers Mrs. Harris waters by her fence. It's mine. It always was. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real betrayal.